We're ready to print our scratch foam blocks. One thing I had to do before I get started is to adjust my jig. This jig was designed to print wood blocks, which are quite a bit thicker than my little scratch foam plates. So in order to get the plate that I'm going to be printing high enough that it doesn't get interfered with by the raised edge of the jig, I'm going to build up the base of it with this piece of backing from a sketchbook. So I'll tape that down so that it's not shifting around on me as I'm printing. And hopefully this will build up the base of the jig high enough that I can burnish without having these raised edges get in the way. So I want to test that. I want to make sure that my plate's just a hair higher than the surrounding part of the jig. And I usually try not to ink in my jig because I don't want to get ink out here. So I'll just set this aside for a moment while I'm inking up the colors. I've already spread out some blue ink. We're using Akua inks, and they are soy based, so they can clean up with soap and water. They're not water based in the way that watercolors are, but with a little bit of soap you can break that down and wash out your brushes and your brayers pretty easily. For my blue ink, I have diluted it with some transparent base so that it lets more of the white of the paper show through. I didn't want a really heavy dark blue, so it should be more of a sky blue. And for the yellow, I'm using full strength, hence the yellow. I've got a smaller brayer. I'm going to try that for my little rectangular shape in here. I'm not worrying too much about hitting this outer area because I know I can just wipe that away, but I don't want to get too much ink down in this area, so I'm taking a little bit of care. If you don't have a small roller and all you have is a large one, then you can use some sort of template. This one is made out of a plastic cover to a sketchbook or to a notepad, but it could be made out of paper. And then what you would do is just lay that over, and then you could roll with a larger roller and not worry so much about inking up the wrong areas of the plate. So I'm just going to use the tissue and carefully wipe off the yellow where I don't want it to print. The scratch foam wipes off really nicely. So we bring the jig back in and align the plate. I make sure it's always snugged up into that upper corner. And then I've prepared my paper ahead of time. So I've got a nice heavyweight Canson edition paper. It's already been hole punched to align with my registration pins. I try to keep it up off the block until I get it in position and then gently lay it down there. And then I'll be burnishing. And again, I'm really only worried about that one rectangular shape, so I can kind of peek to see where that is on the block and press pretty firmly there. Make sure I've gotten to the corners. You don't want to crush your foam plate, but you do need to press hard enough that you're transferring the color. So I'll gently remove that from the registration pins, trying not to stretch the paper at all. And we've got a simple shape there. So it looks like some of my pen marks have transferred in the yellow ink. If that's a problem, you could wash that off ahead of time with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, or you could just print on practice paper until that no longer shows up. I'm not too worried about it because I know some blacks will be printed over that area. So I could print as many of these yellows as I want for my whole edition. Right now I'm just doing the demonstration print, so I'm just going to print one at a time. So now I'm going to print the same block using the blue ink. I'm going to wipe off the yellow areas and roll on the blue ink. Again, I'll put my printing jig out of the way while I'm inking, and we'll try not to get too much ink on our newsprint. Those corners, I'm not going to worry too much about that square in the middle. I might just go right over it and then wipe it clean. I think that'll be easier actually. So I'll use it as a little bridge to get to the edge of those other shapes. I'm going to add a little bit more ink here. Spread it out on the roller. All right, now I want to make sure this blue does not stay in that rectangle because then it'll shift my yellow to a green. So I'll use a tissue again or a baby white. Try not to touch your other blue areas and just lift out that ink where you don't want it to print. We'll bring back our printing jig. Again, try not to touch the plate where the wet ink is. Make sure you align the block the same way each time. You don't want to print one color upside down. And then we want to put the print paper back on exactly the same way. And we'll burnish again. I have a piece of parchment paper here I'll use to try to keep the back of the print nice and clean and reduce the friction on the wooden spoon. Try to cover every square inch of your image in a couple of different directions. And then peek at the progress before you remove your paper. See how that's looking. All right, it's a little grainy. I think I'm going to try pressing a little bit more and see if I can smooth some of that out, but if not, it's okay. Don't press so hard that you crease your paper when it drops off the corner of the block. All right, I think that might be about as good as it's going to get. Again, I don't want to emboss the plate by pressing too hard. So I'll go ahead and take that off at this point. Now, ideally, I would take time for letting the colored areas dry, but because I want to try to move ahead with the demo, I'm going to speed up the drying of this ink by dusting it with some cornstarch. I put a little bit of cornstarch in a scrap of towel, like an old flour sacking towel, and I'm just going to dust a light layer of the cornstarch. You can use baby powder. You can use, probably almost any kind of starch. Maybe even flour, but I don't know if I would try that. And then you want to make sure you just really lightly, you want to try not to smear the ink, but this powder will absorb the excess oil in the ink and minimize the amount of these colors offsetting onto my black block. So once you have brushed the powder across the ink in a couple of directions, then you're going to throw away the excess. I'm just going to tap that off over the trash. And we'll go ahead and print the black on top of that now. So we're switching to our black block. And I've already got my ink laid out. I do need to switch rollers here. I guess I grabbed the wrong one. There's a lot of detail on my black plate that I don't want to lose, so I want to make sure I don't overload the roller with ink. And I use a light touch usually to start with until I get some of that ink distributed, and then I press a little bit harder to make sure I hit all the areas. I'm trying, again, not to ink up the edges of my plate, so I'm being a little more cautious as I roll ink toward the edges there. a little less ink printing on this neck than I would like. I'm going to press the ink down into the grooves a little bit more, pick up a few more of those marks. All right, let's see how it goes. Bring back in the printing jig. Make sure my block is aligned the right way, and then we'll reposition the printing paper. Again, make sure that it's going to line up right. Keep the paper up off the plate while you're getting the pins adjusted, and then once you're sure it's lined up right, just gently lay it down. And burnish real thoroughly again. To hit all areas of the image. Check your progress as you need to. It's a little light still. I'm going to press it a little bit harder, see if I can get a better transfer of those darks. Make sure I get that little antenna at the top. That bottom corner. This is a little bit light. I'm going to try to add a little more pressure there and see if I can get more of the black to transfer. Okay, I think that's as dark as it's going to get. Slip that off the pins gently. And there's our image. You can wipe off the plate if you want to try inking in a different color, or if you want to start additioning, you can just go ahead and continue to ink up. You don't have to clean the block in between colors.